one of the things that bugs me more than anything on mainstream news medias, etc., is that they're keen to put mics in the guy's face like Lindsey Graham and Senator Blumenthal here.
The game that Putin's been playing is about to change. He's going to be hit and hit hard by the United States when it comes to sanctions. China, the game you're playing with Russia is about to change. If you keep buying cheap Russian oil to fuel Putin's war machine, there will be a 500% tariff on all of your products coming into the United States.
This is, I want to say, the 9th or 10th visit that those two guys, at least Lindsey Graham specifically, has made to Ukraine. And they always make all these big grandiose statements. But how come it is that when they made these statements here, there weren't reporters in the pool who were holding those microphones that says, about the past, I remember on these dates you said this and that and the other thing, and none of those things happened. Why should we listen to you now? Put the mic back in. No one does that. In fact, they just let them speak. They just regurgitate what's said and we move on. So anyone who's watching who doesn't watch a show like the one you're watching here, so you're about to know because you've seen us do a lot of that anyway. But now I'm going to put it all in context here. So let's go back to the same month that Biden made that comment there in March 2022 and see what Lindsey Graham said in March of 2022.
If Ukraine falls to Putin, it will set in motion dire consequences for us as a nation. China will get the signal that they can take Taiwan. The Iranians will believe that we have no will to stop their nuclear ambitions. The converse is true. If the Chinese see the world rally around Ukraine and the rule of law being applied to Putin's war crimes, maybe they won't go into Taiwan. The only thing I can say when it comes to Putin, it needs to be personal. He could care less, in my view, about his own people, and certainly could care less about the Ukrainian people.
Oh, snap. Speaking of not caring less about the Ukrainian people, and speaking of that, there it is again, the international rule of law, which we will follow when it benefits us and we'll throw it in the trash when it doesn't. So stop with this nonsense about talking about international law because you could care less about it. Stop talking about caring about the Ukrainian people because you don't. Because you heard him there. He wants to make it personal. It's a personal issue with him and Vladimir Putin. So he'll do whatever he thinks he can to harm Putin, and it doesn't matter who pays the cost. And I've said this many, many times here, and it is really appropriate right here to point it out, that the actions of Lindsey Graham and the others that support him, certainly President Biden before, and although Trump has the ability to turn this off, and I certainly hope he does, at least through 4 months of his term, he hasn't done anything to change the calculations, that you are harming the Ukrainian people by enabling them to continue fighting, but that there's no capacity. It doesn't matter how much stuff you give. They're never going to be able to win for so many reasons we've recounted in the past. So by doing that, you cause Ukraine people to die by the tens of thousands every month. And I mean, the numbers are stark and they're cruel and they're unquestioned. That's the case here. So I don't want to hear any more about, you're talking about you care about the Ukraine people. The other thing that he mentioned there, which was, I mocked this at the time because it was self-evidently untrue. He's regurgitating the domino theory from the Vietnam War. If Vietnam falls, then we're going to have all these communists are going to spread all over the world. Okay, the communists did win. Nothing else was spread. Everybody understands now that the conditions that exist in various countries exist for those countries. And that's exactly the same thing we have today. The idea that China and Iran and North Korea are going to be watching what's going on with the Russia-Ukraine war, and man, if Putin ends up winning, then we're going to launch off over here. That's stupid. I'm sorry, I'm a little impolitic here, but that's what it is, because the Chinese are going to make whatever decision the Chinese are going to make based on the conditions in the South China Sea between them and Taiwan and the balance of power in the Asia-Pacific area. They're going to be watching what's going on over here, and I'm sure they find it interesting. They're learning things about military, et cetera, but they understand that the conditions over there are the conditions over there in Europe. And the calculations and the cost benefit ratios, et cetera, of all the various players has to do with that place. They don't carry on over here. There's a whole different set, number one, of players, and there's a different set of cost benefit factors and calculations. So those two don't go together. I don't know if he doesn't understand that, or if it's just a rhetorical tool that he wants people who also don't know to just believe him and trust him because he's a U.S. senator and there's always a microphone in his mouth. Maybe that's what it is, but I don't know. But if you're watching Daniel Davis Deep Dive, I can tell you for a fact that he is dead flat wrong, and he has been proven wrong, because none of the stuff that's happened over here has had anything to do with over there. China, by the way, as we're going to talk about it in a show tomorrow, actually, there is a lot going on over in the South China Sea and in the Asia Pacific area, and that has everything to do with the conditions on the ground there, as you're going to see. So something to pay attention to. Has nothing to do with what's going on over here. Well, that's not the only time he was wrong. In fact, I don't have time to give you all the things he was wrong, but I'm going to show you a handful of when he has been just catastrophically wrong on some of the most important issues here. And again, for any of our media colleagues who may be watching this, and I know that there's starting to be a few, ask these questions the next time you see Lindsey Graham. Say, why should we listen to you here when you were wrong in 2022 on this whole domino theory thing? And by the way, you're wrong in 2023. And in this case, you may recall the Bakhmut. We talked about that a lot here. You know how that ended. So a little spoiler alert. He's going to talk about that. And then this is in May of 2023. So 1 month before the start of the Ukrainian offensive. One quick note to point here. In the same month, and actually also in April of 2023, I wrote in the publication 1945 that it would be a disaster if Ukraine launches an offensive because it's not going to succeed. I pointed out all the reasons why. They were clearly evident on the ground that it was going to be a disaster. Yet, here's what Lindsey Graham said.
But I expect in the coming days and weeks for the Ukrainian counteroffensive to yield results. And I'm here to tell you that the last chapter of the Battle of Bakhmut is yet to be written. I'm here to tell you that the Russian military is about to have holy hell unleashed upon them.
Holy hell unleashed upon them. How did that turn out? Exactly the way any sober and military analysis would have told you before it happened. That they broke their teeth on the first line. And just real quick to recap why, that's to show you how self-evident it would have been if you had had your eyes open and knew anything, is because Ukraine had insufficient engineering assets. They had insufficient training on combined arms operations. They had insufficient ability to understand how especially in offensive operations, the drone issue was going to be. And because they didn't have engineering support, they were unprepared to breach minefields. And then maybe most of all, they didn't have air defense and air offense capacity. So they're trying to take these complicated breaching operations with not enough engineers to get rid of the mines, almost no air defense or very little, and no positive air force to go and put pressure on the Russian side there. It was doomed to failure, and it did at a great cost to Ukraine. They got the first to 5 Russian defensive lines, broke their teeth on that, didn't even fully penetrate that one line, and then it was spent. That's just the bottom line. That's a fact. And if you watched our show yesterday, I showed you a graphic that showed that the Ukraine side did capture some territory because it was a very broad-based offensive. It just inched along, and I want to say it was 4 months worth. And by September of 2023, that's the last month that they actually gained any territory back from Russia. From that point and to this day, everything has been going in the negative direction. They have been losing all of it. And that's just where we are today. And in that same month, when the offensive culminated, we can now tell you conclusively when that was. It was September 2023. You had Lindsey Graham go back out one more time and talk about what a great deal this is for the United States.
People ask me, is it worth it? Here's what we've gotten for our investment. We haven't lost one soldier. We reduced the combat power of the Russian army by 50%, and not one of us has died in that endeavor. This is a great deal for America.
You've previously said that it's the best money we've ever spent. That's still true?
Since we helped Churchill stand up to the Nazis.
That is just bizarre in any way you want to characterize it. This isn't even about a bad projection. This is with the wreckage of all the stuff that he had been highlighting in May behind him, still smoldering on the battlefield, a complete and utter disaster. He has the audacity to say, best money we've ever spent, and then flat out lies and said, we have reduced the Russian capacity by 50%. It wasn't that you hadn't reduced it by 50% at that time, because Russia had been suffering losses without question, but they had also already started by that time rebuilding their forces and to start sending in even more capabilities, producing more ammunition, more armored vehicles, more aircraft, more helicopters, all that kind of stuff. That had already started by that time. So it wasn't really reduced by 50%. Today, Russia is 50% bigger than they were when the offensive started in February 2022, just by the numbers, despite all the losses that they've had. And there's been a bunch of reports that were out today that claims that Russia has lost maybe 500,000 men altogether, killed and wounded. I don't have any idea what the actual number is. I know it is substantial because we've heard about it from some of the Russian people that we've talked to on this very show. They say they are suffering casualties. Don't know what the number is, but it is high, whatever the number is. But despite all of that, and let's just for the sake of argument, use that number, it's 500,000. That means that Russia is now 500,000 bigger as its armed forces on active duty than it was in February 22, which tells you that they have probably recruited about 1 million people to replace the losses and then build up on top of that, so that now the net is a plus 500,000. That's the fact. You want to brag about that? Secretary Austin, also former Secretary of Defense early in the war, said one of our objectives is to weaken Russia. That's what it is. We wanted to harm them. Biden was talking about we want to harm their economy, et cetera. And we see what happened. The economy has grown, ours has shrunk. The Russian military has grown, and it's not just in numbers. It's not just in terms of how many people they have, but in their capacity as well. I've seen a couple of good interviews here of late. One by Dmitry Simes Jr., and he was interviewing a Russian journalist who was also somebody who either had fought or now fighting. I can't recall the sequence of there, but somebody who's been basically on the front lines in one form or another since 2014. I think first as a journalist and now as a fighter. And he was very candid in his efforts. He didn't sugarcoat anything, talked about their losses, talked about the horrendous things of war. So there's a lot of validity to this, because what he said, again, lines up with what we can generally see on the ground there. But one of the things he really pointed out to, he said that the Russian and the Ukraine armies right now are the best in the world. They gave props to their opponent because obviously they're fighting ferociously. And even though Russia's continued to advance because they have the capacity that dwarfs all the things that the Ukraine side does, they still fight ferociously. But he said all the Western armies, any other armies in the world for that matter, don't have the experience. They haven't gone under fire for how these battles are fought. And until you're underneath that withering artillery fire and the drones that are constantly over your head, blowing up stuff left and right, missiles going in the deep, you have no idea how that would work and how you need to fight on that. It's not a theoretical issue. It is very, very hard to figure out. Thanks to Lindsey Graham's efforts, those are what's continuing on to this day. So the balance continues to go in the wrong direction for us. If that was your objective before, it's now going the other direction. More of the stuff you do here is going to continue to move that balance in the wrong direction on our side. Okay, so one more on this, and that is in August of 2024. So it's like one per year that we've chosen. Could have been a lot more, unfortunately. But this is in August of last year, when the Ukraine side had launched its ill-fated Kursk operations. As you may recall, we have repeatedly told you, did at the time, that they're dead man walking. It has no chance to succeed. All it's going to do is get a lot of people killed, and eventually it's going to be driven out, and it's going to be as though they were never there. Well, it turned out to be a little bit worse than that, but Lindsey Graham, showing his military prowess, said this.
What I think about Kursk: bold, brilliant, beautiful. Keep it up. Putin started this, kick his ass. Bottom line is to the administration, I appreciate your support. Let these people fight. Give them weapons they need to win a war they can't afford to lose.
He was so happy that day. I mean, he's grinning ear to ear. He just said, yeah, kick his ass. Yay, Russia got hurt today. Again, because he's made it personal. He made it personal. So when he saw that Russian territory had been invaded and that the Russian people were now suffering the ravages of war, that thrilled him beyond measure because it is personal with him. But as I said earlier, he is completely undeterred and unmoved by the cost to the Ukraine side, because at least 75,000 Ukrainians were killed. Could have been more than that. Again, the numbers are, no one's going to know for probably years until all the files are opened up in the future. So we don't know, but it's a large number. A large number on top of that were wounded. Thousands of combat vehicles of various types were destroyed inside that Kursk operation there. So there was a tremendous cost to the Ukraine side, and as a consequence of that, on the Eastern Front, where the Russians were continuing their press, because the Ukraine side had to withdraw forces from there to be able to maintain the offensive up here, more Ukrainians died here. So their casualties went up here because the density of their manpower continued to shrink. Well done, Lindsey. Good job. You talk about you want to make it personal for Putin. I think that to a certain extent, Putin may be laughing about this and saying, cool, keep it up, Lindsey. You're one of my best assets. You're helping Russia more than you can even imagine. You're harming Ukraine worse than anybody else because you facilitate a war that can only lead to the death and destruction of the very people you claim to champion. That's just the reality of it. You can see it graphically playing out. Not hard to figure out here. And yet, he wants to try and just continue on with his same nonsense and this arrogance, this hubris on display on the cameras yesterday. And people keep putting those microphones in their faces, and it's just really, really disheartening. And, you talk about just the 75,000 dead, but now we're looking at what's going to come next. Instead of doing what makes sense, what's rational, and ending this war, taking the ugly deal that's on the table today, which the Russians to this day still, there's supposed to be a meeting on Monday. There's supposed to be a meeting in Istanbul, which as of airtime today, I still haven't seen confirm whether or not the Ukraine side is going to accept it. But the Russians said they're going to show up in Istanbul on Monday, and hopefully the Ukraine side will. At least they're talking. I mean, let's find any positive you can on that. The only wise thing to do, the only sane thing to do, if you care about Ukraine, is to reach a negotiated settlement on whatever terms you can get. And they'll be ugly. There's no question about it. But they can be had. Because if you don't, then you're going to get the alternative. And again, don't take my word for it. There's no analysis here. This is just a repetition. You had the ambassador for Russia at the UN Security Council a couple of days ago point blank say, we will either achieve our objectives in negotiations or we will decisively win on the battlefield. He said it straight up. No ambiguity there. No diplomatic language. As blunt as you can be. That is where we are. The Russians now are openly saying it. They're not even trying to hide any of these things. It's open and they're doing it. They're having this offensive operation. The other big consequence of this Kursk operation is it invited Russians into the Sumy province. Before that, they weren't in there. Now then, they're rolling south toward the city. They've taken a number of villages here in the last few days. More and more territory is continuing to move south. And by all accounts, that's going to accelerate. In the Kharkiv area, that's going to accelerate, and several others too, possibly even the Chernihiv region. So that's going to, a whole northern front is already open, and the eastern front continues to move as well. Everything is going in the negative direction for the Ukraine side, and instead of recognizing that, you have the likes of Lindsey Graham, Senator Blumenthal, continue to advocate for things that just make no sense whatsoever, that have been proven to be utterly failed on the battlefield. And again, don't miss this. If the Russian side, which started disastrously in 2022, were able to overcome all those mistakes, were able to improve their forces, were able to offset the losses and continue to grow, and then they're on the offensive all over the place, and the Ukraine side doesn't have the manpower, the economic potential, or the production capacity to even match what this. The only thing they can do is they match in the drones, and that's substantial, but it's not enough. It's like 1 out of 6 of the main areas. All the other 5 are decisively on the Russian side. So if you stick with what Lindsey Graham is saying, if you listen to him and all the people that are, many of them are on his side, and God help us all if he convinces President Trump to do this in a couple of weeks and to put on these new sanctions and to not compel the Ukraine side to reach a negotiated settlement or just withdraw all of our support and leave it up to them to do whatever they deem best at that point. That's the only thing that's out of mercy. That's the best thing they could do for the people of Ukraine. It remains to be seen whether that's going to happen, but this is the course that's set before us right now. This is what we have achieved. This is what passes for elite thinking in the Western world, especially in the United States. Celebrating things that are disaster, oblivious to the fact that their proposals have no chance of success and a high probability of utter failure. And it's worked out that way. And now you have a huge track record of performing, of all those things coming to pass. And that doesn't slow down the nonsense that we saw in Kiev yesterday. And obviously Zelensky is loving it, because he's detached from reality as anybody can be. So this just feeds him. It's literally, it's like an intravenous drug into Zelensky's arm when Graham comes over and says those kind of things, because that feeds his delusion. And it just continues to feed the meat grinder at the front lines, because Zelensky will just keep sending men to certain death. That's just how it is. It's ugly. It's unpleasant, but that's where we are, folks. And I think that you need to know the truth, because we're unintimidated and uncompromised to tell you whatever the truth is, no matter what it is. That's where we're at. We do have to hope, and I do hold out some hope that at least President Trump is still in the decision-making process, and he has signaled that he's going to do something in a couple of weeks. We'll see if he does. I think that whatever comes out of this meeting here in Istanbul, assuming that it happens on Monday, could go a long way towards pushing him into a decision-making process. I don't think he wants to just stumble along and drag it out and do nothing and let events take over. I think he's going to try to take some action pretty soon. And if he sees, and if his advisors tell him about things that we've talked about here today, and he sees that if he stumbles along or does what Lindsey Graham is going to have, then he's going to have his name all over the failure. That might prompt him to do what we've suggested, that he withdraw and says, you guys are on your own now, and finally does the walk that he's been talking about here. We'll see how all that happens. You can count on Daniel Davis Deep Dive to continue to bring it to you as it happens. And if anything happens in between now and then, we'll bring that to you as well. And in the meantime, have a great Saturday. We'll see you next time on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.